Music City Pickers. The Lord shall command the blessing upon thee in thy storehouses, and in all that thou settest thine hand unto. And he shall bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Deuteronomy 28:8, King James Version. Several years before Mom died, I started selling off guitars that I didn't need anymore on eBay. The first guitar I sold was a Rickenbacker, and it sold within 30 minutes of listing it. I knew that I had made a mistake and priced it too low. It gave me a rush, though. I realized that if I had more guitars, I could probably make a living selling them. My friend Steve Cochran called me out of the blue one day and said that Ben Jumper, the guy that owns Soundcheck, the rehearsal facility downtown, was selling off a bunch of gear that had been damaged in the Nashville flood. Steve wanted to know if I would go in half with him and buy the gear, clean it up, and then sell it. I agreed to meet him down there and see how badly damaged the gear was. Surprisingly, it wasn't that bad. Only a few things were actually damaged. Steve and I bought the stuff and got to work creating an inventory list. I took pictures of everything and we created an eBay account and started selling each item. In the end, we profited. A lot. It seemed I had a knack for it, just like my grandpa did. He was known around Hamilton, Ohio to be a good barterer. I had always been a gearhead and knew a lot about the stuff we were selling. It seemed like a good way for me to make a living. I just needed products, a way to keep up with the items, and find out the best way to ship it all. If I could do that, I wouldn't have to tour. I could stay at home and be with my family. Eventually, Steve pursued other businesses, so I continued alone with buying and selling. I started buying gear off the online classified website Craigslist. I'd offer a little lower than their asking price, then turn around and sell it for market value. I started researching vintage guitars. I began with buying the book George Gruen's Guide to Vintage Guitars. I'd go page by page reading about the things that affected the value of the instrument. The book was published to be an essential aid for collectors, dealers, and players. It provided specifications, serial numbers, and other pertinent information for determining the originality of vintage American acoustic and electric fretted instruments. I made a lot of mistakes early on. I'd identify the guitar as a different model than what it really was, or I'd determine the instrument was all original when in actuality it wasn't. I kept trying, though. I'd go to every guitar show that came to town to learn, buy, and sell. When listing a Gibson Les Paul guitar online, a guy named Gabe Hernandez contacted me to let me know my listing was inaccurate. He told me it was a different model than I described. When I looked further into it, I realized he was right on some things, but wrong on others. I let him know I appreciated the information. We talked some and struck up a friendship. That friendship turned into a partnership. We joined forces and put our money together to buy more and more gear. Not only guitars, but amplifiers, mandolins, and banjos. We needed a name, so I came up with the name Music City Pickers. I've always been a fan of the TV show American Pickers, so I wanted to incorporate that into our store name. I thought it had a cool double meaning. Before we knew it, we had built up quite a stash of gear. I was good at finding, and Gabe was good at selling. Gabe came up with the idea of traveling to different cities and buying musical instruments. He had worked for another guy years before that did that with baseball cards. Our first city was Westchester, Ohio. I knew that I could get the word out around my hometown and have a lot of people show up with stuff to sell. Gabe and I had about $50,000 to work with, hoping to max out our investment money. We'd set up in a hotel conference room with our banners propped up in the lobby, directing visitors to our location. We'd buy ads in the local papers to let people know we were coming to their town to buy. We'd try to get as much publicity our dollars could afford. I'd even call local radio stations to let them know what we were up to. To our surprise, it worked. We'd usually buy around $25,000 worth of gear every time we made a trip. It worked really well for several of the cities, but there were a few that weren't really worth the hassle of it all. We realized that if it hadn't been for one or two people who had brought a lot of gear, we probably would have lost money. Gabe and I sold gear out of our garages for about a year until we decided to open up a brick and mortar store. While searching for a place, I told Gabe about a cool section of Nashville that I thought would be perfect for us. It was right off of the infamous Music Row, 16th Avenue. It was called Edge Hill Village. It was a hip old warehouse that housed white-way cleaners back in the 1930s. The new owners had just renovated the big plant and were leasing space there. Gabe agreed after seeing the space. It had this urban industrial vibe that was perfect. I called a designer friend named Bobby McLeod to come in and help us design the inside. We wanted the customers to have a wow factor when visiting our store. We went in cahoots with another guy named Stephen Elvis Schutz, who had a small shop called Rockology. He sold vintage rock and roll memorabilia, and we thought it'd be an ideal matchup. We decided we'd do just one more road trip and then try another tactic to find gear in the future. Our last buying show was in Lexington, Kentucky. I called a few friends of mine to let them know that I was coming to their area and to let their musician friends know we'd be there. One friend was Randy Birchfield. He was the drummer for Josh Logan back in the day. We toured together for about a year in the 80s. I remember getting a call from Randy saying that he knew a girl who owned Keith Whitley's guitar and was looking to sell it. I got excited knowing that I might be able to buy the country legend's guitar. I told him to tell her to come by and see us. When she showed up, I saw the case she was carrying. It had Keith's autograph written in white marker on the top. After a closer look, I noticed that it had a baggage tag with Keith's name, address, and phone number. It also appeared that it was authentic. When I took out the guitar, it was a Martin Sigma SE36 acoustic electric guitar. The guitar itself was a little rare, but wasn't worth much on its own. I told the girl that I'd need proof that it actually belonged to Keith because at that point the case was worth more than the guitar. She left a little disappointed, but she said she'd try to find a way to prove it. Within an hour, she called me back and told me to look up a YouTube link where Keith was playing it. Sure enough, it was his guitar. I told her to come back to see us, and I'd purchase it from her. When I offered her what I did, Gabe was very reluctant. He thought it was way too much money. I had to explain to him that Keith was an iconic figure in the country world. Gabe had no idea who he was because he was a rock guy. We bought it, and I was as proud as I could be. I called my publicist, Amy Willis, at the time and told her the story. I asked her if she'd put out a press release telling the world that we bought Keith's guitar. She thought it'd make a great story, and within a day or so, people everywhere knew about the guitar. The day the press release went out, I got a call from Amy saying that a country artist manager called her and told her that her artist wanted to buy it. I told Amy that I was getting ready to list it on eBay and she'd have to come up with our minimum bid. She got off the phone and called me back within 30 minutes saying that the manager would come in that day and write us a check. I asked Amy who the artist was and she said that the manager didn't want to say yet. The person turned out to be an up-and-comer country artist named Chris Young. He had been a huge Keith Whitley fan and he didn't want the guitar to get away. The manager came in and bought it for Chris. He ended up playing it several months later when he sang a cover of Keith's classic song Don't Close Your Eyes on the Grand Ole Opry. The story goes that in the mid to late 80s, Keith Whitley performed with mainly 3 guitars, a Fender Telecaster, a Martin Acoustic, and a Sigma by Martin Acoustic Electric. 2 of the guitars have been seen on display at a few museums in the Southeast since Keith's passing. The Sigma by Martin, however, remained in the hands of a family friend and musician, Earl Watkins. Earl previously owned the Circle H Saloon near Lexington, Kentucky. Keith and Earl had become good friends and even played music together at the venue. During a visit to the Circle H Saloon in 1987, Keith traded his Sigma by Martin for a Fender Telecaster that belonged to one of Watkins' bandmates, Jerry Fannin. Not long after that, Earl purchased Keith's guitar from Jerry for $500. Watkins would later pass it on to his daughter Jean, who would go on to sell it to us. The grand opening of the shop was one to be remembered. Lisa helped with putting on an upscale event. We sent out formal invitations to all of our friends to kick off our new venture. We catered in food and had bartenders serving cocktails throughout the night. The store looked amazing. The place was packed with Nashville artists that night. I had set up a small PA in the corner where some of my friends could just walk up and plug in with an acoustic guitar and sing for everyone. Gabe and I got up and welcomed everyone, and I asked my friend Gordon Kennedy to come up and play a few of his hits. The intimate acoustic setting was so special that evening that it sparked the idea of having weekly songwriter shows in the store. I had also invited my ex-bandmate Tim Rushlow to come by and visit. I was thrilled when I saw him walk in. It had been years since we had seen one another. Several people asked if he and I would get up and perform together, and we did. We sang 3 or 4 little Texas songs, and the crowd went wild. He and I stayed in communication after that night and worked out all of our differences. We remain good friends to this day. With the shop being right off Music Row, we had some incredible artists come by and visit. John Prine, Rodney Crowell, Casey Musgraves, Sam Palladio, the Mavericks, Brothers Osborne, and many others. Taylor Swift even shot a Keds photo ad in there because they liked the store's vibe so much. The television show Nashville was hot and heavy during that time, and they came in asking if we could rent some gear to them for the show. Of course we said yes. We asked if it'd be possible to visit the show sometime and watch an episode being filmed. They were kind enough to let us do that, and we met some of the cast and crew. I stayed in business with Gabe for about a year or so, but I was ready to make a change. I wanted to stay in the music store business, but I wanted to do it alone. There were several reasons that Gabe and I didn't see eye to eye, but I wished him well. We split up the inventory and we parted ways when our lease was up. Gabe and I had hired a young guy that was working in the little pizza joint behind our store named Kevin Shuck. At first, he was doing a lot of our shipping and cleaning the instruments. He was a hard worker and really had a lot of knowledge about gear since he was a guitarist himself. When I decided to go off on my own, I kept the name Music City Pickers and asked Kevin if he wanted to move forward with me, and he said he would. I told him I'd like to make him the store manager and give him a commission when he found gear for us to sell. We moved into a little space at Soundcheck for our office and also had a spot in the warehouse in the back where we'd keep our inventory to ship out. Almost all of our business was online. We'd sell on eBay and a new website that had just popped up called Reverb.com. Every now and then people would drop by and shop. Being there at Soundcheck, all of the musicians were aware of us. We had Joe Bonamassa, John Oates, and some other big-name artists stop in. Life at home was good, but Lisa and I were not seeing eye to eye on disciplining Evan. I thought she was too easy on him, and she thought I was too hard on him. Evan was an amazing boy. He was so bright and kind. I couldn't have been prouder. We had enrolled him into pre-K so he could get used to being around other kids and make some friends. In school, he had some problems with respecting the personal space of other kids. He was also a little too rambunctious at times. I recommended that Lisa and I go see a Christian counselor since we were arguing so much about it. I thought having a referee in the room would help us see things more objectively. We chose to see a lady at church, and she was wonderful. We were able to work through some of our problems and made the changes that she suggested. I was still having some emotional issues from Mom and Tootie passing away. I got back on some antidepressants so I wouldn't sink even lower. My whole childhood foundation was gone, and it was hard for me. I kept on feeling like I was next in line, and the thought was scary. I was now 43, and I felt life was slipping away. MCP, Music City Pickers, did pretty well for about a year at Soundcheck, but the drive from Franklin to Nashville was grueling every day. Nashville was beginning to be a very popular place to visit. The TV show Nashville really boosted people's attraction to the town, and so did all of our sports teams. Big corporations were moving in and buying up real estate everywhere. It had got to the point where when you drove down some streets, you couldn't see the sun because of all the high-rises. Traffic was terrible. If we had been a business that relied on foot traffic, we would have stayed where we were, but that wasn't the case. We were mainly an online business that shipped our products. I started looking for a place that was closer to Franklin. Eventually, I found a great space that was only 5 minutes from the house. It was approximately 2,500 square feet and was perfect for what we needed. With the advice from my friend Joe Chambers, I decided to buy the property instead of renting it. Joe told me that it would pay off in the end. I don't think that I could have done it without the money I received from Mom and Dad. After I sold their house, I was able to put a big down payment on the building. That helped tremendously with the financial strain. I'd sit at home at night and draw up how I wanted the place to look and what kind of renovations would need to happen to make the space work for us. I hired a contractor to do most of the major renovations, and Kevin and I did all the rest. Lisa helped a little, but she was super busy with Evan. She was also doing more and more voiceover work and acting. Once the renovations were done, Kevin and I, along with some friends, moved in. It felt amazing to have our own space. I had my own office that doubled as a writer's room and recording studio. We had a warehouse space for our gear, a photography room, lesson rooms, a break area, restrooms, and a large showroom in the front. We were buying instruments left and right. We tried to find people that were getting rid of their collections and just buy all of it. Of course, we made a few mistakes here and there, but overall, we were rocking and rolling. I had several people working for me. One was Micah Tanner. He was much younger than me, but was tenacious and had a lot of connections and was good at finding gear. In fact, he put me in touch with Peter Frampton. He said that Peter had some amplifiers he wanted to sell, and we jumped on that opportunity. My good friend Gordon Kennedy was good friends with Peter as well, so I called him to see if he could get us all together. The next thing I knew, I was over at Peter's studio listening to some new music he and Gordon had been working on. Ironically enough, the studio that we met in used to belong to Richard Landis. It was the same place where we recorded Hot Apple Pie's record that never came out. God had led me to a place in life that I thought I'd never be. I was the owner of my own business 5 minutes from my house. I bought my own business condo, which had always been a goal of mine. I had a family at home waiting for me every night at closing time. I was going to church a lot and had left all my burdens at the foot of the cross. As a family, we started attending Fellowship Bible Church in Brentwood, Tennessee, and it was good for our souls. The preaching there by Dr. Michael Easley was incredible. He was more of a teacher than a preacher. Every Sunday, Lisa and I would walk away with a new perspective on life. We began to grow as Christians, and life seemed to be headed in the right direction. Go tell it on the mountain. This was the time of my life where I was taught to witness from my pastor Michael at Fellowship Bible Church. I wanted to go out and let everyone know about the glory of God. I was appalled with the sad truth that 85% of Christians never invite anyone to church, and 95% never win anyone to Christ. That was staggering for me. I wanted to do my part, even if it was in a small way. I used social media to get the word out. Facebook and YouTube were my main outlets. I would go on walks in the morning and use a selfie stick on my phone to video myself talking about life, music, or whatever I could think of at the time. I'd slip in a scripture every now and then or something inspiring to lift people's spirits. I called it walking and talking. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. Isaiah 55:11, King James Version. I think a lot of Christians don't witness because they feel they lack the knowledge of God's Word. The fear of losing friends also silences them. In many parts of the world, persecution is a real threat. Other times, it's just a lack of conviction. I know that in the past I didn't witness because I didn't want to be a hypocrite. But none of these obstacles should keep us from spreading the hope, love, and eternal promise God has given us. Even if we just spread one simple verse with non-believers. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. John 3:16, New King James Version.